Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow, and on today's episode, we look at Tottenham's loss against Chelsea from the weekend. What went wrong for them in that game? What's going wrong for them this season? And how can they fix the attack ahead of the transfer window? Then we look at Newcastle facing their own issues in attack after an embarrassing 3-1 loss to West Ham. Will things be fixed as the team gets to know Voltemada better and they get some fitness? Or does Eddie Howe need to rethink the midfield balance? Plus, why we're not optimistic about West Ham despite that victory. And we look at a £70 million Premier League midfielder linked to Manchester City, Manchester United, and Chelsea. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. So we're back for another Monday edition of the podcast, and joining me again is Hayden van Brewer. How are you doing, Hayden?
I'm good, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's good to have you back here. It was an interesting weekend of Premier League action, and we kind of wanted to dig into some of the bigger narratives because some of the teams right now that we expected maybe to look a bit better at this stage of the season have been underperforming. And I'm not here talking about City or Liverpool. I'm talking about Spurs and Newcastle. Spurs, I think, despite finishing so badly last season, we were all pretty positive on the Frank appointment. Newcastle, a bit more of a mixed bag because of the loss of Isak. But let's start with Spurs, because if you look just at the kind of top line stuff this season, you'd say this is a clear improvement on last year. And I think, whatever way you cut it, it's a clear improvement on last year. Right now, they've got a +9 goal difference. And if you just looked at that, you'd think, oh, okay, like they're maybe going to be on the edge of the top four. We're going to see what happens. But it's hard to be impressed by what they've done so far. And this weekend, their game against Chelsea, the stats from this game, they were outshot 15-3 at home. 2.9 expected goals to 0.05. It's the kind of stats package that makes you wonder if you missed a red card. And we thought it'd be interesting to talk about these two teams today, both because they are major topics at the moment, but also because there have been articles on the Transfer Flow recently about both these teams, especially in attack. Mohammed has written articles for us about both of them. And so we wanted to use those articles as a jumping off point for today's discussion. So if you haven't checked them out, I really do suggest you go away and read them for a little bit more fine-grained detail of what we're going to get into today. But this was troubling. Like, Spurs were behind for an hour in this game. They had nearly half the ball. They produced absolutely nothing. And we've talked about it time and time again about how nobody in the midfield can pass forwards. I mean, is that where the problems begin and end, Hayden? Or are we looking at a more total issue here?
Yeah, I think that it feels pretty clear that is and continues to be the obvious problem for this team is the lack of midfield passing. I kind of want to take a step back and look at what Frank's sort of goal was coming in, because I think part of why we were so optimistic about Frank is he's this really level-headed, structured guy. He feels very process-driven, big picture, it feels like he looked at the team that he inherited from Ange and he was like, there's a lot of really athletic guys here. I want to take this team and I want to make sure that we can get out of the back safely and we can defend a bit more, with a bit more stability. And between those two things, we should have enough sort of going forward to make things happen and hurt teams. And I think some of those things have happened. I think their buildup looks a lot steadier. They look like they're able to get out of the back. They've got a bit of structure and a plan there. I think continuing to utilize Vicario, that continues to be a strength for them over teams that maybe don't have a goalkeeper that can play as much. And so they've been good there. They've, I think to some extent, they've sat a bit lower at times. They've done a little bit of this, what we talked about Newcastle and Arsenal last year, doing this high block or low block thing, not as much middle block, but they've just really struggled to break teams down who sit in a middle or low block against them. It's okay, we're getting out of the back, so then teams retreat, and then what? And that's really been the issue. And so our initial feeling is is this a midfielder thing? For Newcastle, we'll talk probably about some slightly different solutions in personnel that might change it. But for Spurs, the first look is is it just this midfield passing group as a whole, and feeling I'm not fully convinced that James Maddison just coming back into this team fixes all these problems. It does feel like there's a balance and a composition issue here, whereas Spurs in transition still look like they can be really strong. They have so much speed and
Yeah.
athleticism to get forward, but breaking down a team with passing looks like something that they're not really set up to do right now.
Yeah, this feels like it's a team that's okay, we can't pass, so we're going to have to rely on carrying. So the aim is like, let's try and get people into space, obviously. But obviously, you don't get the free carries with Spurs that you do get with Brentford, right? You know, like those opportunities to carry into space. And what instead you end up with a lot of here is Mohamed Kudus or Wilson Odobert or Xavi Simons having to run it into a congested area. I mean, in this game alone, you had Simons and Kudus attempting 12 dribbles between them and completing 4 of those, and that's a lot of the ball to cough up. And what I guess is particularly worrying about that is that when you are asking your forwards to take people on and try and create something out of nothing, there should be a defensive benefit to that, right? Which is, okay, we can keep everybody in reserve and we're just going to ask you to beat your man. And if you don't do it, at least we've got a load of guys back. But in this game, they got countered again and again, and they gave up an awful lot on the break. And that combination is particularly bad. Like, they pressed high here, but they were repeatedly cut open in pretty embarrassing ways. And that's something that I guess we would have expected not to see with Frank, even if we should maybe have expected, in the absence of Kulusevski and Madison, to have some of this toothlessness in attack.
Yeah, I mean, they got stripped so many times, like we're saying, kind of carrying out of the back. It didn't look like they had a plan for how to either get the ball to Kolo Muani and play off him, like what he was
Mm,
supposed to do with it. It felt like he had defenders all over him, and he couldn't really cope with it. They never really like spun him in behind in the channel. He didn't if he received it to feet, he didn't have anyone near him because they had everyone sort of so deep. It wasn't a great game for Xavi Simons, and it really felt like the only outlet that was really reliable to them was like Kudus receiving it on his chest and having to like hold off a defender and then carry the ball inside, and then he'd play it, and then it would go kind of back to the center backs and they'd reset, and that was sort of it. Yeah,
mm.
really. Yeah, it was a game that highlighted how frustrating that bit of it is for Spurs, and they're going to need to find a different solution here in terms of doing that, because they don't have Harry Kane who can come off the line and play make and spin guys in behind with diagonal passes and sort of
Yeah.
run a lot on his own. Like, he runs the show on his own as a center forward there. Um, Again, he's even playing as like a 10 now for Bayern. They don't have that kind of guy in that spot, and they need to have a bit more of a team solution to that to, you know, cause problems, but also get them through opponents. And I'm not sure exactly what that is right now, because it does feel like when they're playing that, I mean, they started the game with the Bergvall, Sarr,
Mm.
Benziker midfield. It feels like, well, I don't see how that's actually going to get their way through a team.
Well, it was worse than that, right? Because it was Palinha in there as well, and Bergvall was notionally playing kind of as the left winger. Like, there was just
Yeah.
no width out there. And in theory, you're like, okay, that's another bet on carrying, right? That's one thing that we've seen Bergvall do. And maybe if everybody's fit, the version of this you see is Solanke up top and maybe Richarlison on the left, and then you do have that kind of dual threat to win headers, to bring balls down, and then to drive at a back line kind of quickly. You said that off air that you think there's another team in the Premier League which maybe provides the blueprint for what Frank has in mind with this Spurs team.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams will have looked at maybe what Arteta and Arsenal have, and will be like, "Well, I don't know if we can necessarily aspire to that because of personnel, budget." I mean, it's hard to replicate a guy like Bukayo Saka. Like,
Sure.
there are things that you can do if you're Arsenal because you have a player like him, or a player like
Mhm.
Odegaard, or a player like Saliba. Like, they have some really special talent. But I think a lot of coaches were probably looking around at what Eddie Howe has done at Newcastle,
Mm.
and how this team has really clear defensive plans. They've got a high level of athleticism. They've been organized and good enough to sort of pass out of the back. And they had a really good season last year. They haven't totally looked like themselves. Like they haven't totally looked like how they were last year, this year so far. But I look at some of what Frank probably came in to do and was probably thinking, if I can take a page out of Eddie Howe's book, that can help sort of stabilize this group from the chaotic season they had last season. So there's a piece of me that's thinking like that's along the lines of where they're going, but they and we'll touch on Newcastle I think in a second, but like that's sort of our question with this Newcastle team as well is sort of when teams don't allow them to transition or pick the ball off them high, when they have to break down a team with their passing, that was sort of one of our big question marks coming into this season as well. And I think that still persists.
And I think there are players, you look at the midfield and everybody in this midfield can cover ground and they're all okay to very good defenders, with Palhinha, the best defender among them, but the worst passer, I'd say. Having those runners out wide, if they can find the space, like you can totally see how Kolomuani or Brennan Johnson are in the mold of that right-hand side at Newcastle. But I also look at them and I think, to me, this feels like a lot like shitty Bournemouth. Honestly, like Mo's article pointed out how they attempt a ton of long balls, and they really do. I mean, this is a team that attempts about 100 passes a game fewer than Liverpool and Chelsea, but they attempt more long balls. So they're fifth most in the league for that, and they complete under half of those. So they're very reliant on ball recoveries to try and get upfield. But with that, and that feels like the way the league is at the moment, right? Like a lot of teams are playing a bit more reserved with their fullbacks. They're willing to go long, and they're like, we will try and win the second ball, and if we can win it, then we've got that quick kind of that like false transition that we can go into. But I just don't know how much room there is for separation now in the Premier League. Like Spurs are fourth in the league for ball recoveries. Liverpool are 17th in the league for ball recoveries. But Liverpool still have 90% of Spurs output for that. So I just think there's not really room for separation there with which to turn your shitty attack into a cromulent attack. And unless you've got the most amazing midfielders who are mopping up all the loose balls, or unless you've got really amazing aerial forwards like Semenyo or Shada or somebody like that who is just going to win you far more than they have a right to. So I kind of struggle to see the plan for how this turns this team into something really good. It just feels a little bit like understanding that we literally can't play through the midfield right now. And Porro is really the only guy in this team who can be relied upon to do any sort of consistent ball progression with the ball on his foot.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And that's going to continue to be an issue. I think there are a lot of good traits about Tottenham center backs, but none of these guys are going to step in and be like the real passing playmaker or something like that. Like there's not really a case for us to see the squad and be like, well, if they go to a back three, then the center back can take on more of the passing responsibility or something like that. Like not really. That's not really what this group looks like. Like they do. It does feel like they need a solution that's a bit more in the midfield to have some success there, because otherwise, they're gonna look good when they've got Kudus and Brennan Johnson and Richarlison and Kolumwani and Solanke running in transition and using their speed and athleticism on teams. But outside of that, they need to find other ways to break teams down, because otherwise teams will recognize this pattern, but that's a way that they can nullify them a bit.
Yeah, the only real success we've seen in this regard has been in the League Cup against Newcastle, where they moved Porro into midfield and dropped Palhinha into a back three. And then it's like, okay, I mean, Romero wasn't in that game, but then you're kind of like, if Romero's the wide right centre-back, then he maybe gets more passing lanes open to him and he can carry. And then you've got Porro in midfield who actually can do some stuff. And then, yeah, maybe you get something out of it. But right now, it just feels like this is what happens when you've I mean, they've been a bit unlucky in that like Sarr was kind of amazing in France and just didn't progress. Bergvall, I think we all really like, but he's exciting because of his ball winning and ball carrying, not because of the one thing that they would really like to have him do, like passing. Right? So they've got unlucky in that regard, but also it feels like they've just built a midfield around guys who can do a bit of most stuff, but nobody who's really great at like actually getting his foot on the ball and controlling the game. without Maddison here, it feels like does this team just struggle through till January now? Because before this last game, they looked okay. They were kind of XG and expected goals against roughly even after 9 games. Now, after this beatdown at the hands of Chelsea, they've got something like a -4 expected goal difference in the league. I mean, that's not particularly great. And if teams also figure out that they can sit deep on Spurs and Spurs can't do anything, I'd struggle to see where they're going to find solutions for that, save set pieces.
Yeah, I think alarm bells should have been ringing really before this game. This is
Yeah.
this is a game that brought it to the media a little bit, having it be a London derby and having it be at home. Like those things really have. But I think for us, we've been sort of, and this is again credit with Mo with the article. Like there have been problems here that have persisted, and because they've been overperforming a little bit on the attacking end. Like it's sort of covered it up because we're like we think this team should be good and should be in this sort of top group contending for European places, and the underlying numbers aren't quite there. And we expect a little bit of again, Nottingham Forest can tell you about the transition to and from Ange Postecoglou being possibly a bit chaotic, and I'm sure Spurs were expecting a bit of that. But this is a team that we haven't really seen clicking, and this sort of has brought a lot more attention on it. But I think that's sort of been the case already. That we're still waiting to see how that gets going, and yeah, there's definitely I think red flags about how this team is going to try to play through opponents moving forward, and that's something they're going to have to fix. They're going to have to really work on that.
Well, shall we turn our attention then from them to the team that you identified as a possible blueprint, Newcastle, who actually are in a pretty similar predicament? You know, I wrote the preseason preview for Newcastle, and I said my worry about them was like the sameness of the midfield. Like the midfield is this double-edged sword where it keeps them incredibly compact defensively. It's incredibly physical and skillful and difficult to play through. It also doesn't have a dedicated creator in it. And as a result, you're relying on your attackers or one of your fullbacks to do an awful lot. And then, you see this game against West Ham, they lose 3-1 away from home. They had over 72% of the ball in the second half. They needed a goal, and yet they were outshot 8-6 and they produced 0.25 XG. And that feels like the nightmare scenario. Look at the changes they made in this game. Barnes, Osula, Elanga, and Ramsey came on. And of all those guys, if you were facing a sitting defense, Barnes is the only one that I would say I might expect him to do something in that situation. Like the other 3 guys, I think, like they want to play the same way as the guys that they replaced, really.
Yeah, I guess my starting point here for Newcastle, because like the defense has still been really excellent. Like this is an elite defensive team. We talked about this in a weird way where we're like, we don't know exactly how they'll go in the league, but they could be set up to do really well in the Champions League. Like this style of play, their robustness, you just don't see them getting bounced out against a lot of teams. They're the kind of team that can keep it close, and because of how athletic they are, knock it around with top sides, like give them problems, especially when they go on the road and things like that, which you need in that type of competition. I think my starting point here is like, how much do you think things get fixed by having, like, predominantly, I think Lewis Hall, but like having their full set of fullbacks back, like Lewis Hall, Livramento, Trippier, like how much do you think that fixes it? And how much do you think there's still a big issue there? Kind of, and as we get to this point in the season where obviously you had the preview where you looked at it before the year, we've now got a sample size, they've had these injuries. Do you feel like that fixes it, or how does that feel to you?
I don't think it fully fixes it, but I do think it goes a long way. Like when you've got Dan Burn playing left back, then you want to keep him reserved, right? You want to have this kind of more like a back 3 structure. And when you have Hall there, firstly, his progressive passing allows Bruno to push up a little bit more. And Bruno is the one guy in that midfield who does have a bit of specials, both with his movement and his snap shooting. Well, and his passing. His passing is also good. He's just not a number 10. So I think that helps. Plus having real outlets like fullbacks who can actually over and underlap, that to me is a way that you can try and solve this, right? Like if you don't have the elite creative talent, what can you do about it? Numbers is what you can do about it. So that I think definitely helps. I think having Visser back would also help quite a bit because, when we talk about Voltemada, like we said, everybody basically said before he arrived, like, this isn't a guy that you want to just swing crosses at, despite the fact that he's enormous. And then he scored a couple of headed goals, and suddenly the narrative was maybe you can throw crosses at him. But actually, Newcastle are crossing all the time. It's all they're doing at the moment. And Voltemada doesn't want to be like the one target man for that. Like if you want him trying to get chances in the box, you do need somebody else in there. And so I think partially it'll be helped by the fullbacks coming back. I think partially it'll be helped by the midfield getting to know their striker better. Because then if you have somebody in there on the flank like Visser, or maybe Joel Linton, who obviously, as we know, like played as a forward when he was at Hoffenheim, like maybe, and was bought as a forward, like maybe you could end up with a situation where the cross comes in and he's the guy attacking the near post or something, and Voltemada gets a bit more space. So I think some of it is like gelling and some of it is personnel, but I still think there's a ceiling on the attack because there's just nobody in there who can create much. Like it does just I've said this many times, but it does just feel like a little bit like last season's Arsenal, but even poorer in personnel. Where like some games you're running out a 3 defensive midfielder kind of lineup, and then you're saying, well, Saka will do something. Well, it feels like Newcastle do that a lot of the time, but they don't have a Saka. It's like, well, Bruno will do something.
Yeah, or Gordon, right?
Yes,
Gordon
exactly.
sort of feels like the guy on the attack that could do that.
Yeah,
It's the painful narrative, and we shouldn't spend too much time on it. But it does, like, there is a real part of you that like looks at this team and goes like, God, if they had Elliott Anderson and Minta, then this is probably fine. Like they're so robust defensively. If they have a guy that can cut inside, use Livermento's just running ability to create an overload on the right if they need to commit more bodies forward, they're able to keep this really robust midfield that's been such a strength for them intact. And Anderson adds sort of a level and a skill of passing where he also doesn't need to be like your deepest guy. Like Bruno can still be your guy to get you out of the back through buildup, and then Anderson can be a passer a bit higher up the field. That it feels like that would be a perfect fit. Those are the things that they need. And obviously those solutions aren't going to be there to them. So they might have to manufacture it in a different way. But I think the easiest step will be getting the fullbacks back and having Lewis Hall in particular, who offers them a bit of versatility and again, passing ability from that side that hopefully will contribute to it. But yeah, this is going to continue to be a little bit of the issue here for Newcastle, is that real cutting edge, I guess, especially against teams that more and more try to sit in against them. It's something that we thought we'd see early on this season. We have a bit.
There's also just stuff where I think I can't really tell whether this is a product of the attack not clicking or whether this is part of the reason the attack's not clicking. Like, so the shooting, they are just shooting from anywhere. They're just shooting from anywhere. Murphy's taking like 4.5 shots per 90 from an average of 22 yards out. Gordon, 2.8 shots from 19 yards. Barnes, 2.3 shots from 19 yards. Bruno and Tonali combined for 3 shots, 20 yards. Like there's one guy in the squad who's getting decent volume and decent quality, and it's Voltemada. And Elanga, I think, gets credit for not taking dumb shots, but he basically doesn't take any shots. So with that kind of stuff, I guess that if you don't really trust your ability to pick your way through, getting a quick shot off feels like as good a solution as anything. But if you're going to do that, you need to produce insane volume. You can't just produce like mediocre volume. Like you're not going to get through that way. To me, Newcastle, I look at Newcastle every game and I think whether this is the good Newcastle game or the bad Newcastle game is entirely like game state stuff. So if they go up, maybe we get a good Newcastle game. And that's what I look at in the Champions League. I'm like, a lot of the Champions League, you can play as if you're a goal up because the teams who are going to, Bayern are going to come out against you, right? Like you could play against Bayern the way you want to. But in a game like this, against a Nuno team who then get like a very lucky second goal to go 2-1 up, like before half time, then can Newcastle break them down? No. And then they do give up more than they would normally, and suddenly they're in trouble. So I just kind of look at them right now, and again, this is like the Arsenal story last season. It's like they get the lead, they'll be fine. They don't get the lead, they're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, and ultimately ties are really a death sentence for teams that are trying to chase these top spots. I mean, that was a little bit the story with that Arsenal team, right? Ties were the reason they weren't able to kind of stay all the way as title contenders, and so
Yeah.
that is a little bit of the risk here. But it's from a West Ham perspective, like this was a much needed first win under Nuno. This is a team that has been really, really poor to start the year, and the one way that you can kind of see this team getting out of that problem is Nuno is coach. He's in early enough. If he can make this team look like a Nuno team, which they haven't really so far, like in the first games under him, they haven't really looked like they've adapted. And you sort of go, oh, this might take a little bit of time. And time's not an asset that they have when you're in the relegation zone. So the biggest thing they need to do is stop some of the bleeding defensively. Like there's problems at both ends of the pitch for them, but defensively they need to look like a Nuno team. They need to be able to sit deeper, which again, this West Ham team already was sitting deeper at times, but they need to, when they sit deeper in a medium and low block, they need to be able to stop teams from just getting so many shots against them. That's like step number 1 and 2 for this team. And I don't know, this was like a really good result, but it's can they like build on that and do it consistently? Because it's taken, I mean, I think this is maybe his 5th game in charge or 6th game in charge. It's taken a bit of time, and they're going to need to show it consistently if they're going to get out of this situation. They need to be more robust in that part.
Yeah, and again in this game, you know, like they ended up with 15 shots and 1.7 expected goals, but at halftime it's 2-1 to them. They've created 0.24 XG at that point. You know, they get that own goal to go 2-1 up. And then the second half, like Nuno can play the way that Nuno wants to play. And at the end of the game, like over half their expected goals come from that Souček shot right at the death. Like that's it. That's what really does it. And so I think you look at it and you're like, that's a great win against a tough team. And the stat line looks pretty positive. But I just don't know. Like you're right. Okay, they stopped the bleeding in that, like they gave up 12 shots in this game. They get 15 of their own. They also gave up nothing from set pieces in this game. Like I think they gave up literally 0.01 expected goals from set pieces in this game. So this is good. They didn't get forced into like crazy errors by the Newcastle press, which is positive as well, because this Newcastle press does get a lot of chances off those high press, you know, situations. And everyone defended, you know, like Fernandes, Paquetá, Potts, you get like 11 tackles and interceptions combined out of them. Somerville chips in a lot. You get a lot of defensive volume out of Diouf, kind of always. So there are positives there. And I do still think, you know, like Magassa, maybe Magassa and Potts and Fernandes or Paquetá, like maybe that is kind of enough. But then I look at their next few fixtures, and up until Christmas, their Premier League fixtures go like this. They've got Burnley next week. Okay, winnable game. Then they've got Bournemouth away, Liverpool home, Manchester United away, Brighton away, Villa at home, Manchester City away. Like that's their run until Christmas. And I look at that and I think, if at the end of that run they're on 7 points now, I think. If at the end of that run they're on 10 points, that's probably where I expect them to be. That is very, very hard for them to get out of. Unless they go out in January and they're like, we are going to pick up 2 defensive midfielders and a winger or something, you know, like that.
So that's it for me. Like this midfield is where I look at it and go, this is not the midfield that Nuno is used to having, or when he's been most successful with these sort of, let's call them bottom half budget teams and helping them to overperform and grow and do that kind of thing. Like he's had some pretty good resource in there. Even thinking back to the Wolves teams with like Ruben Neves in midfield and things like that. Like that's usually an area of the team where like if he could set things up in his ideal way, that's probably where he's really putting a lot of resource and like is a really important position for him. And that's where this West Ham team is probably weakest. And I think that's something that we flagged kind of coming into the season. We were sort of a little bit worried about Alvarez, Alvarez leaving, I think on loan to Fenerbahce, and feeling like, they're a little bit weak in here. They've got some good creative individuals that can do stuff in attack between Bowen, Somerville, Paquetá, but that midfield is really the question. And that's where you sort of go like, if they want to be the Nuno team, and Nuno's going to really leave his mark there, that area of the field, guys like really need to start performing well. And yeah, just hearing that run of games, like you're like, that's really, really difficult. Really, really difficult. With the volume of shots that they're conceding right now, that's what they really need to reverse the trend.
I would have loved to have seen Nuno manage this team with like peak, I guess late peak Mikhail Antonio. I think that would have actually been a really, really fun player for him to use. Yeah. But yeah, man, I find it extremely hard to be positive about them, much as this is a good win against a stout defensive side. They're going to have to improve even from this in order to get points out of that run. Because I see maybe 2 fixtures in there where I think like there are decent points on the table for them. Shall we go on then to a transfer? We are approaching transfer season then, and we're making it a point now to take a look at some of the players who might interest some big teams in January. And actually, on the topic of midfielders that Nuno is used to having, we were going to discuss Elliott Anderson today because he's been linked with Manchester City, with Manchester United, with Chelsea ahead of the January window. He's 22 years old. Obviously, he's homegrown. He's rated at about £70 million by the transfer rumours. I've got to assume that Forest asked for more than that. When they're asking like 55 for Alanga, I think Anderson's going to cost a lot. We've been threatening to talk about him since probably match week 3. And in the end, Kim couldn't contain her excitement and wrote about him in the newsletter. But after 10 games, I think it's kind of hard to argue that he hasn't been one of the best midfielders in the league this season. I don't know what you think about this, Hayden.
Yeah, no, I think he's really had. It feels like kind of each year he's continued to step up. He was in the Bristol Rovers team that won massively on the last day to win promotion. Like he did it there. He's just continued to progress his game and build his skill set. He's sort of broken into the England squad. Like there's a real chance that he could be starting for England at the World Cup next summer.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit depends on how this Nottingham Forest team can sort of right the ship and get going again. But he's he's a midfielder that can cover ground. He's like in terms of his passing ability, that's where he's really, it feels like, continued to elevate his game. And he's a guy that looks to get the ball a lot, but not necessarily like right off the back line. And I think that's where you start to see a team like City that feels like we can get out of the back pretty comfortably. We just need that next passer to really bring in all of our attacking talent a little higher up the field. For me, that's where the fit is a little bit tricky with Man United, because I think they do need a passer like him and a guy that's athletic and robust in terms of defending and doing some of those things that he can provide. The issue is like, I actually think United needs that what would I call like a first receiver off the back line, the person who's looking for it. Kind of the forwards press the back line. He's the guy you get on the ball there to be that safe, steady pair of hands. Again, we were talking about Newcastle. Bruno Guimaraes is kind of a model for that kind of player. He's not exactly that guy, or that's not really the role that he's predominantly been playing. And so it kind of gives me a question of like, well, if it's him and Bruno in there, there's a lot of similarities, I think, to some extent there, that they, are probably looking to some extent to get on the ball and do some of the same things. And they're not necessarily the guy that just wants to get it right off the back line, that prefers to drop in these sort of fullbacks or between center back spots. Like he likes to stay in the midfielder and then be a guy that's getting the ball a lot and sort of pulling the strings. Again, variety of passing. He can do difficult passes. Like that's the real value there. So I look at it just sort of initially and think like it's definitely a type of profile that I like the fit for with City right off the bat. Like that one kind of jumps to me. I like that Man United are actually looking at a midfielder. My only worry is that he's a little bit too similar to the other guy in the midfield who's their captain and nailed on starter.
So if you were imagining him at City then, like I agree about the United thing. Like inevitably, whenever we talk about Anderson at the moment, we end up talking about Wharton as well. And like
Yep.
Wharton does feel like the more natural fit for what United need, at least as long as Bruno's there.
Completely agree with that, by the way. Completely
you
agree.
need that guy who's just like extremely secure on the ball, can receive under pressure on the half turn and play forward. Like that is definitely what United need. For
Yep.
City though, like I think I'd he'd kind of need more final third output, right? Like I mean, I know he's upped it this season. Like he's gone from like 0.11 expected goals assisted to like 0.17, which is a pretty big jump. But I just think would in your idea here, would he be playing with somebody like Rodri then, who is actually the guy receiving the ball, and then Anderson is like kind of the next rung up the ladder towards the final third?
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. I don't
Okay.
know. I think part of it when looking at him and his teammate and Morgan Gibbs-White, I think
Mm-hmm.
there Morgan Gibbs-White was a guy that was talked about obviously very strongly with Spurs. And I think part of him, he has this like dual threat where he's got a bit of maybe a bit more of the ball carrying side of it.
Yeah.
But whereas Anderson's doing that deeper in the field, right? It's not that Anderson's not a good ball carrier. He actually carries the ball a lot, but he does it
He
kind of,
does.
again, receiving it from that first receiver. Then he's the guy kind of bringing it into the attack there. I mean, again, he's used to getting the ball a lot. He wants the ball a lot. He has the passing ability. Do I feel like he's a guy that could fit into this City team and add another level when you have guys like, again, Doku, Cherki, Marmoush, obviously Erling Haaland, but like again, I think City are already taking advantage of Erling Haaland. Erling Haaland is excellent. It's really about how
Mm.
can they get the most out of this new look attack. Foden again inside. They're trying different things, and I wonder if he can be the connector that just sort of makes that happen. Because I
Sure.
think so much has been made of like when Rodri comes back to this team, does everything just sort of click, and he now is just sort of doing like so much of everything, and I think having a partner in there like Anderson could be the way to get a bit more out of that. A guy that can get on the ball. It means that maybe Foden and Doku don't have to be central or inside all the time to get those possessions. They can hopefully
Mm.
have more isolated situations high up the field, creating space and using that there. So that's sort of my feeling. Again, that's why I like him for that. But yeah, to your point, like um, with like Wharton, like one of the interesting dynamics for what Man United need, and it's not to say that this couldn't be Anderson, but it feels like if you're going to be a midfielder or a center back for Man United, you have to have like some big plus value on your long passing. It feels like
Mm-hmm.
the long switches of play or direct play into Sheshko are sort of like a staple and defining feature. And when I think of
Sure.
Anderson at his best, I think of him inside the field, connecting different passes, either connecting with a
Sure.
winger
Mm.
or connecting with tens and stuff like that. And that fluidity makes me think that the City one is a bit of a better fit right now, at least.
Plus, he's been empowered to take more risks this season. Like, I mean, he has improved his like he's gone from like 35 passes a game to 66, and his passing accuracy is still like lowish for a midfielder, right? It's like low 80s, kind of 83.
Yeah.
But he's gone from 4 final third entries to 8.8, which is pretty staggering. But he's defending less. He's dribbling more, but obviously, his dribble success is like winger dribble success, not central midfielder allowed to dribble success. It's like 56%, not like 75%. So he's being allowed to take those risks, but you're allowing him to take those risks because you've got guys behind him. Like you don't let him. You're not letting Elliott Anderson dribble at 56% dribble success if he's the guy receiving the ball from the centre backs. Like that's nuts. It's interesting
Correct.
hearing you talk as well about that. About him connecting for City in light, I think, of the article that Neil wrote for the Transfer Flow about Foden dropping deep. Because
Yeah.
the cascading effect there, right, is okay, well, Foden and Cherki can be higher. You can play a true double pivot if you want. If Rodri comes back without his legs or he has to play in there with Nico, then you can actually play Anderson there and he'll also be completely fine. Kind of works.
I think yeah, we could also see a bit of a shift. I mean, the biggest question area for me in the City lineup was a little bit at like right fullback. Like they've got sort of a bit of a weird cohort there, like Nunez or Rico Lewis. It's
Yeah.
it's all a bit unusual. Both of those guys are guys that a lot of other teams are probably midfielders, right? So a little bit weird there. I'm looking to see what happens kind of as like Ait-Nouri comes back,
Yeah.
in terms of like how that looks. If they do end up going like, okay, even if it's not Ait-Nouri, but like the left back can be the one that sort of bombs on a bit. We're then able to pull if that's Doku. Doku is then maybe able to play a bit more inside there, and then we have this sort of more double pivot kind of look in front of it. That could be one way that they do this. I'm not totally sure. Like, it does feel like as City's getting these guys back healthy, Rodri and Ait-Nouri both coming back into the game on the weekend, that's something that could be a look, and you do wonder if Anderson would be the piece. And I think Anderson is a bit more the kind of style that we would have expected to see them sign, as opposed to like Tiani Reinders, who like has kind of in a kind of a funny way, he's sort of like your McTominay box crashing 10 type a little bit, right? Like, I think the expectation for City, especially with the fee that they paid for him and how he's looked in the team, is a little bit that like he'd come in and be, if not the same sort of like creative presence as Kevin De Bruyne, that he would provide some box presence with his size, his a little bit of composure and things around the box. Whereas like a player like Anderson would be a little bit, sort of deeper and a bit more of a link that would then allow them to hopefully keep their other attacking midfielders higher.
I also wonder with Manchester City whether we see them move towards guys like this who might make sense for managers who are not Pep as we approach the
Sure.
end of Pep's time at City. Like, it does feel like some signings they've made over the years, were obviously like guys Pep wanted, but also guys who Pep specifically could get a lot out of. But a more conventional manager might look at and say, I don't know what this guy is. Like I'm not playing Tiani Reinders in like a normal central midfield, and I'm also not going to play like some kooky 4-1-4-1 type thing, that Pep might try. Anderson is the kind of player who, at this point, you've got to imagine if you're signing guys like this on 5-year contracts, they're presumably going to outlast Pep at Manchester City. And as a young, homegrown, multi-skilled central midfielder, it's very easy to see the wisdom in doing that. I mean, as for the Chelsea link, like, just don't go to Chelsea. And isn't this is kind of what Enzo's meant to do for Chelsea in theory? I don't really know what Enzo's become at this point. Like, he's getting in the box a lot this season, but to me, the whole idea was like Enzo could do all this stuff, so I don't really know why you'd go and drop
and they
nine
have
figures.
And they have Lavia, and they have Caicedo, and they have Reece James is also excellent when he comes and plays midfield. Like, Chelsea have so many strong
Santos,
midfielders.
Dario Sua,
It just feels like I mean, again, that hasn't stopped them in the past from doing this, but the return and the value that they're getting above what they already have for Anderson is definitely lower than for United and City, at the very least. I think, for me, the other two are like, I don't want to say for City it's necessarily like a need, but it makes a lot of sense for City in terms of like what he could bring to the team. And for United, that midfield is the biggest area of need for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think that brings us to a close for today's episode, except to say that if you want to see more of me and Hayden, and more of me and Ted, more of me, basically, you can head over to the Transfer Flow's Patreon, patreon.com/thetransferflow. We've got 2 full-length episodes up over there, and we've got a bunch of B-roll as well. Every week, we're going to be dropping new episodes over there, talking about the big topics, getting into evergreen issues around football. Like you and I talked about how we break down low blocks, how teams set up to do that. We talked about the value that managers have. Are they as important as they're made out to be? Plus, answering listener questions. So we would love for you to sign up. We would love for you to send us our questions. Let us know if you're enjoying the podcast over there as well. Hayden, it's going to be a while before I have you on now, man. I'm not going to see you for a little bit. Where can people find you in the meantime? Where can I find you, Hayden? That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I'm H Van Brewer on Blue Sky, and it's good. It's good to pop on for a Monday. Not our normal kind of rhythm, but there's a lot of good storylines as teams are kind of getting into this really important chunk of the season. I think this is when things really start to get exciting for the Premier League as it gets a bit colder and rainier, and it feels like each game really has a lot on the line. And yeah, it's going to be really exciting, especially for, I think, these teams that are trying to figure out how to get their offensive firing, coming into this January transfer window. Can we solve it ourselves beforehand and spend that money elsewhere, or is this the time we need to make a move? We'll find out.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the January transfer window already, man, because there are a bunch of teams who I think must be looking, circling the 1st of January on their calendars thinking, oh my God, we need to get there. Thank you very much to everybody for being here today. If you're watching us on YouTube, please do like and subscribe, leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, and we will catch you later in the week. Bye-bye.